Okay, so tonight what I want to talk about a little bit is give you an introduction to St. Thomas Aquinas, a great philosopher from the 13th century, the leading figure of the medieval period in philosophy, and that includes not only all the Christian philosophers, but the Islamic and Jewish philosophers as well at that time. Certainly a giant among them and a giant throughout the history of Western thought. And tonight I really just want to give you some background a little bit on some things to think about that are sort of behind the scenes from the text that we're going to be talking about, and you're going to be studying and so forth, that have the specific ideas that Thomas Aquinas had about morality and its relationship to politics, as a matter of fact. So first, a little bit about his life. He was born somewhere around 1224, 1225 in a place called Rocaseca near Aquino. His last name really isn't Aquinas. It's Tommaso of the place called Aquino, which is north of Naples in Italy. He was sent to school at age 5 at a Benedictine monastery at Monte Cassino, and I'll say a little bit more about Monte Cassino in a bit. But the key part of the early stage of his life was this decision to join the Dominican order. I don't know if any of you happen to be Roman Catholic or know much about Catholic religious orders, but there are lots of religious orders, and they're frequently named after their founders. So, for instance, the monastery at Monte Cassino is called Benedictine because it was named after the founder, Saint Benedict, who lived in the 5th century and wrote probably the most prevalent rule for monastic life, a rule for how to live together in community and so forth. So people who follow that order are called Benedictines, and there was an order that followed Saint Dominic, in a way in the footsteps of Saint Francis. Perhaps you've heard of Saint Francis and the Franciscans. Well, around the time that Thomas lived, the Benedictines were a well-established and actually quite wealthy religious order. And Thomas's parents were what we would call middle class or upper middle class. It's a little bit anachronistic to talk that way, but they certainly weren't paupers in any way. And Thomas had brothers and a sister, and their parents thought that their children would do well and get into public life and probably do quite well for themselves. And here's Thomas, who decides he wants to enter religious life. They weren't 100% happy about that, but they thought, well, if you're going to enter religious life, join up with those Benedictines who gave you the education that you got. I mean, after a while, you get in good with them. Who knows? You end up being the abbot of the monastery, which in those days was an extremely powerful position, not just in religious life but in social life as well. And why not? I mean, if you insist on a religious life, why not take a position where you could still make something of yourself? But Thomas, on the other hand, got interested in this new religious order, the Dominicans. Really, if you ever see a priest of the Roman Catholic Church, see them sign their name with an OP after it, you know that they're in the Dominican order. That stands for Orders of Preacher. It's the Dominican order. But at Thomas' time, they were brand new, and in a way, you might think of them as like hippies. They weren't going to. They were rejecting the wealth and the complacency and the ease and comfort which some of these members of religious orders were living. They were what you and I might consider street preachers. They would be the ones out on the street corner telling us to repent and mend our ways. And they were poor and had no great establishments. But Thomas got very romantic about this Dominican order and wanted to join the Dominican order. And his parents were, like parents always are, very concerned about a life choice that says, I'm going to go join with the poor and the counterculture. But Thomas was very insistent. In fact, he got some of his Dominican friends to meet him and take him away to Paris. But his parents found out about it and sent his brothers. And Thomas's brothers were nothing like him. These guys were like knights. These guys spent most of their day drinking beer and getting in fights, I guess would be the best way to describe it. In the service of the well-to-do. But these were manly men kind of types, and they didn't have much interest in the religious life. And Thomas's parents told his brothers, "Now you go get him and you lock him up, and lock him up in one of our country homes till that boy changes his mind and gives up this great desire to ruin his life by joining these Dominicans." So the brothers grab him along, and he's on his travels to Paris. They grab him up, they take him up to the summer, home of the Thomas's family, and they more or less keep him prisoner. And Thomas, he's not changing his mind. He wants to join this order. He's insistent on it. His brothers aren't going to let him out. So actually, they get it in their head. They decide, what this boy needs, our brother. He needs him a little romance. He needs a woman. So the story goes that they went out and hired him a professional consultant in that area, if I may put it that way, and brought her out to the house and figure if they could get her to seduce Thomas, he'd see the great benefits of not being in a celibate religious order. But that didn't work out. Thomas chased her from the place with a burning torch, and his brothers threw up their hands and said, "Well, there's nothing we can do. He's going to go do it." So finally, his family allowed him to go. He became a member of the Dominican order. He went to Paris to study under Albert the Great, important theologian. And in those days, studying was kind of not exactly what we do. Let me pause here 1 second and get you to just click on the yes button if you can hear me okay and I'm coming through loud and clear. Would you please do that for me real quick just to make sure? Yeah, that's great. I see you guys coming up here, most of you. Okay, so anyway, the university education is not the same as we have today. It's not, for instance, what I'm doing now, which is, in effect, lecturing to you. Instead, what happened was a question was posed to the students, and they had some time to prepare answers to that question. And classroom was effectively a debate with the different students giving their answers to the questions and objections to each other's answers. And then finally, the master, the teacher, would come in and clarify the whole issue with the more or less correct answer and informing the students where they had gone wrong if they had in their own answers. So you can imagine that if you didn't talk, if you didn't participate in that kind of education, you weren't getting an education at all. It's not the same as being able to sit and listen to a talk like we all tend to do today. And Thomas never said that much. And he's a large fellow, Thomas Aquinas. He's a pretty big man. Maybe even a little bit tubby, Thomas was. He was a big fellow anyway. And he didn't say much, and students, being students, took to teasing him. And they gave him the nickname the Dumb Ox. And so no one thought much of him. There he was, this big lumbering fellow, didn't say too much in the classes, and of course that was the name of the game for education then, was to be a participant. And finally one day Albert, his teacher, said, "Thomas, what do you think? How about an answer?" And Thomas began talking, and boy, I'll tell you, in effect, he never stopped talking after that. And Albert the Great was known to have said that, well, if this guy's a dumb ox, soon the whole world will hear from this dumb ox, and surely they did. So he passed all of his tests. He became a master by writing a commentary on the sentences of Peter Lombard, which was sort of the theological textbook of the day, and anybody who was going to be a teacher had to write a commentary on this important theological textbook of Peter Lombard. He did that, and then he began and completed in 1264 his first big work, which you can buy today in usually five volumes, called the Summa Contra Gentiles, which is an explanation of the Christian faith. In 1266, he began what was to be his masterwork of life, the Summa Theologiae, which is if the Summa Contra Gentiles was big, the Summa Theologiae was humongous. And it's funny, you can see in the words it says like summary of theology, and it was meant to be a textbook for beginners. But I don't know how many pages you would think would be a nice sized book for a summary of any kind of field, theology, for instance. 200 pages, maybe 300 pages. What is, thousands of pages of this summary textbook of Thomas Aquinas. But he completed the first part in 1267 to 68. He completed the second part, which actually comes in two parts. So the Summa Theologiae there's part 1, there's the first part of part 2, the second part of part 2, and then part 3, which was not quite completed in his lifetime. Also during this period, he wrote commentaries on Aristotle. We'll say a little more about Thomas's relationship to Aristotle as we go along, but he wrote commentaries on the book we read earlier this semester, the Nicomachean Ethics. We have that book. It's actually a pretty good book. You can get it at Amazon, and it has the text of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and all of Thomas' notes and commentaries on that text. So quite interesting. Same thing with the Metaphysics and Aristotle's book on the soul and his logic books and so forth. In 1272, he returned to Naples to begin the third part of the Summa. On December the 6th, 1273, though, he had a deeply religious experience of some kind. And as a result of this, he stopped writing, and his very faithful secretary, Reginald, asked him, why are you stopping? You can't stop now. This is a work of genius that you're doing here. You can't stop. And Thomas said, now it seems all that I've written seems like straw to me. And people have tried to interpret what that means, whether we should just take all of his written work and throw it out the window, or rather all that written work and all that philosophical and theological work that Thomas did broadened to the point where you have what he would call, or they would call, a religious experience. I don't know. He was being called to an important meeting in Lyon and a council of the church. Because of his great wisdom, he was called to help settle some issues, and there was an accident. Evidently, he was riding and on probably a donkey, I would guess, and his head hit a tree, and he was injured, and as a result of complications of the injury, he died. But in the course of his lifetime, he wrote more than 8 million words. Imagine the output like that. A couple of pictures. There's the Dummox. You can see from the picture on the black and white picture that he sort of looks like a sizable guy. Botticelli's famous painting, he looks a little more rugged than the softer face in the other famous picture. The one in the black and white I actually have hanging up in my office here, not facing the way you guys are, so I can't show you. Here's a picture that monastery, Monte Cassino. Those of you who are interested in World War II history would know that this was a scene of a great battle in World War II. The Nazis had holed up there and under siege for forever. Well, it's been rebuilt, and it's a beautiful place up on the mountaintop, as you can see. And the vision we talked about has been memorialized by paintings on the left. You can see the Santi di Tito's painting with Thomas there, looking at the cross. It's a similar one by Sacetta on the right there. But it was, I guess, during celebration of the Mass, the Roman Catholic religious liturgy, that celebrated every day. That during this celebration of the Mass, Thomas thought that God spoke to him and said, "You've been a good and faithful servant. What is that you desire?" And Thomas answered, "Only you, Lord, only you." Very, very, very religious response. I don't think that I'm the same kind of person. I'd like to know, the next winning lottery numbers, I suppose. But Thomas was a very devoted man of faith and a great philosopher as well. I'm hearing dinging. Are you?
I'm sorry. I was just wondering if.
Yes.
I was wondering if When Thomas Aquinas said that it all seems like straw to me, was that when he said that he only wanted to serve the Lord, or did he have, is there any discussion on what happened to make him stop writing?
No, that's a great question. Of course, what goes on in a person who feels that he or she has had, a profound and mystical, experience. It's very hard for me to put myself in that place because for myself, I don't know that I've ever felt exactly that. But, Thomas, if once you get to, if you take a chance and take a look at some of his work, not the little excerpt that I assigned for the class, but, sort of really look across at his work, you could see a man kind of possessed to want to know all that he could know about the world around him and the God that he believed made it. And some have interpreted this statement of Thomas that, I feel like everything I've written now is like straw. Some have interpreted to mean, well, it was useless or a waste of time. But others have interpreted it as not at all, kind of a waste of time, but a prelude, an opening to a larger vision of the ultimate truth. In other words, going through all the steps of learning as much as he could about the world and about God, he opened himself up in a way that he could, understand more profoundly the truth. And in that greater understanding, words failed him. You see what I mean? See the difference? One is, well, this attempt to understand anything, has just been blown away by this experience I've had. Or I feel like, it's all been wrong or it's way off. The other interpretation is that, by investing yourself in the effort to, seek wisdom, maybe wisdom comes. And when it comes for you, that's enough of talking. What do you think?
That's helpful. I still kind of wonder, but I guess, that's the unknowable because he didn't share that. So.
Yeah, I mean, Reginald, really tried to get after him, just to continue his work, and despite having had this. But I don't know. I mean, we could psychologize too, right? We could say that he was in a state of exhaustion. I mean, what does it take in a lifetime? That I'm 51 years old. Thomas died 2 years younger than I am now, and had written, an entire library of profoundly interesting and important, deep theology and philosophy. I mean, maybe maybe it was an exhaustion that stopped him. I don't know. It's a great question. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, if any occur, just jump in. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit new, so I didn't recognize the dinging as a request to talk. But hey, just jump in there if you want to. I think you just can. Okay. So some key challenges to Thomas's work here. When Thomas was alive, Aristotle and his philosophy, this pagan Greek philosopher, his work was just being rediscovered in the West. They had some of Plato's works, but Aristotle had gotten lost through the so-called Dark Ages, and it was really only coming back into the consciousness of the West. And by the time Aristotle, these works were being circulated, it became clear to the church that Aristotle taught some things that the church did not teach. For instance, Aristotle taught that the universe was eternal, and the church taught that God created the heavens and the earth in 7 days. Aristotle taught that pride, which we found in the Nicomachean Ethics to a certain extent, in the sense of saying the truth about yourself, pride is a virtue that needs to be developed in people. For the church, pride was a sin, maybe at the root of all other sins, a certain pride is. So that's just two little examples of how this work by Aristotle seemed to conflict in the vision of the world that the church was producing. And of course, it went much deeper than that. But Aristotle was very interesting to a lot of people because Aristotle wrote wonderful and insightful books on not just ethics, but metaphysics and physics and biology and on animals and on meteorology, several books on logic, on rhetoric, and there was a lot of wisdom in Aristotle. And so there was a tension. The church suggested that Aristotle's works be suppressed, and in fact ordered that no one was allowed to study or teach Aristotle's works. So of course, students being students, you tell them that books are banned. Those are the first books they wanted to read. So they read a lot of Aristotle. Some suggested the ones who were willing to read Aristotle, well, it must be like this. There must be two truths. What the Bible says is true, because the Bible says it, and what Aristotle says is true for this world. But I'll tell you, Thomas Aquinas was having none of that. He didn't think it's possible to have two truths. If two statements flatly contradicted each other, then one of them was wrong. And Thomas was unwilling to scale back on that. But he wasn't willing to throw Aristotle out the window because so much of what Aristotle said to be right. If I could simplify it, if God made the world, he made Aristotle, and he made Aristotle's mind. And Aristotle's mind was able to figure out a lot. So it would be a great waste, a tragedy, to suppress Aristotle. But it wasn't enough just to say, when they contradicted, well, so be it, whatever. No, Thomas thought there had to be a synthesis of the truths that Aristotle was teaching about the natural world and about reasoning and logic and ethics, and the truths taught by the Catholic faith. He thought that had to be the case. So a key challenge of Thomas's life was to develop a synthesis of faith and reason. Now, some people say that, as a formula that all Aquinas did was baptize Aristotle. That's not really fair. I think the more you study that, the more you see that Thomas read Aristotle, thought very deeply about him, but Thomas himself was a very creative and original thinker in his own right, and not just taking Aristotle's work and putting a coat of Christian paint on the top of it, so to speak. So I think Thomas, in many respects, was very successful in that attempt at a synthesis. And it should be noted, too, that Thomas was very profoundly influenced by Platonism, the ideas of Plato, and his Neoplatonic followers. He's not just a straightforward Aristotelian. Now, those are sort of background ideas, and but I'll give you a little bit of what this synthesis that Thomas was working on was all about. So, to understand Aquinas' ideas about natural law, we're going to have to understand a little bit about his metaphysics. We saw a little bit about metaphysics with Plato already. We saw a little bit about metaphysics with Aristotle, and how both sort of undergird or underpin the moral ideas that both those philosophers have. Well, the same goes for Thomas Aquinas. His views on natural law and moral philosophy are built on a foundation of a particular metaphysical vision. We need to take a look at that. Thomas takes ideas from Platonic metaphysics and ideas from Aristotelian metaphysics, and to arrive at an original vision. So let's review a little first. But some ideas, some terminology. Okay, let's be clear on some words. These are basic terms that apply in anyone's metaphysics, and we'll have to see how they work in each of these cases. So the first word we wanted to define is act or actuality. It's very simple. That means act is something. Something in act is something that's real. It's something that exists. It's something that has being. Something that's in potency or that has potentiality, that's something that does not yet have actuality, but could have that actuality. And Thomas says that act and potency are repugnant to each other. Pretty strong words. What he means is one thing, cannot be both actually something and potentially that same something in the same way at the same time. So let me give you an example. When our daughter was 15 years old, she was potentially an attorney, but not actually an attorney. Now, today, she is actually an attorney, but she is no longer potentially an attorney because she is actually an attorney. So you can't be both in potency and in act towards the same thing at the same time in the same way. Now, you can be actually a 15-year-old girl, like our daughter was at the time, and potentially an attorney. She's actually one thing and potentially something else, but you can't be actually something and potentially something at the same time. Does that seem clear? Feel free to click on your yes or no if it isn't. Substance. When you hear a philosopher talking about substance, the philosopher is talking about something real, some real thing. And a definition of substance that Thomas Aquinas would agree to is a substance is that which is apt to exist in itself, not as an intrinsic part of anything else. A substance is a whole existing in its own right, an abiding center of activity, which for philosophers mean both acting and being acted upon. So if anybody wants to pipe in, let me ask you this question. If that's the definition of substance, if that's the definition of a real thing, how many things meet that definition? Give me an example, or tell me how many things you think would meet the definition of that which is apt to exist in itself, not as an intrinsic part of anything else, a whole thing existing in its own right, an abiding center of activity. Somebody pipe in, give me an answer.
Now, does this go back at all to what Aristotle was saying when he said that, like, you have, a baseball bat, but it was a thing before that? Or am I confusing that it's, when you say existing in its own right, like it was wood, but now it has a different purpose to being a baseball bat or something? Or am I overthinking?
No, you're good. You're right on track. But let's just try to pull what you just said apart just a little bit. So is a baseball bat a thing that exists in its own self and not as an intrinsic part of anything else? Yes or no? What do you think? Can you tell where a baseball bat leaves off and the rest of reality begins? Do?
No.
Sorry, a couple of people will stepped on each other there. What do you think? Is a baseball bat a whole thing that exists in its own right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're exactly right. Now, wood. Let's just ask about wood. Now, be careful before you answer this question. Is wood? Not a baseball bat, not a wooden mallet, not a wooden shoe, but just wood, something that exists in its own right? Or does wood have to be an intrinsic part of something? What do you think?
An intrinsic part of a tree, or are you going back?
You're right. You're right on the money, right? We never really. It's funny to think about this, but we never really encounter wood. We encounter a wood beam, a wood plank, a wooden shoe, a wooden baseball bat, a wooden tree, but there's no such thing as just wood. That's an odd thought for us, but if you think about it, the only things we encounter in this world are these intrinsic unities: bats and wooden shoes and trees and wooden benches and pieces of lumber. It's the piece, it's the shoe, it's the tree, it's the bat. That's the substance. And take a baseball bat again. It exists in its own right. It's an abiding center of activity. Now you say, I understand activity is in the sense of being acted upon because Ryan Howard will pick up the bat and swing it. Okay, the bat's being acted upon, and it stays a baseball bat. It abides, even though that activity is going on. But it also acts. It doesn't act like Ryan Howard, a baseball player, acts, but it acts like a bat acts. It's something that can be picked up. It's something that can strike a baseball because it's solid. It's something that can reflect light so that somebody can see it out in front of them. So real things are those things that are not intrinsic parts of anything else. And let me ask you this. Are you a substance on this definition? Yes or no? Click your yes or no buttons. Are you a substance on this definition? Yeah, that's exactly right. You are a substance on this definition. Um, Now, are you a part of other things? Sure you are. You're part of this class. You're part of the United States citizenry of the United States of America. You're part of the Republican or the Democratic Party. You're part of your family. But you're not an intrinsic part of that family where you can't tell where you leave off and those other things begin. You happen to be a member of those things, but you are your own integral entity, your own real thing. Okay. Now, the next word on the list, accident, is it doesn't mean an unfortunate event that happens to you in your car or whatever. Accident in philosophy and metaphysics means something that might be otherwise, something non-essential, a non-essential property which inheres in a substance. So, for instance, you're a substance. You're an abiding center of activity. In other words, you can change, but you won't change substantially. You'll still be the kind of thing that you are. In fact, a human thing. And you could change, for instance, your hair color. You could change your clothing. You could change your political party. All of those features of you or properties of you are what we would call accidents. It happens that you have blonde or red or black hair, or it happens that you're in the Republican or the Democratic or the Libertarian Party, or you happen to wear a sweater or a T-shirt. Those things can be different, but you stay the same. So there's, in fact, two kinds of change that are possible for us. Accidental change, which happens to us all day long, and then substantial change, which happens to us maybe only at the moment of our death, in our case. Right? Now, it may be that some things undergo substantial change. For instance, a caterpillar that goes into a chrysalis and emerges a butterfly. It was a caterpillar. It's now a butterfly. I would say that counts as substantial change, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But for us human beings, we stay human beings our entire life. Form is a word that we encountered in Aristotle. Now, he brought up the baseball bat. Form was one of those, four causes. What kind of a thing this particular thing is? Well, in that case, it's a baseball bat. Or as Plato would put it, it had the form of battiness. Well, I guess that's not the right word for that. But it has batitude. How's that? It's something that participates in a particular form that other things of its kind can participate in. Now, what makes one bat same and one bat different from each other? You have two bats. They're the same in the sense that they have the same form, but they're different in that they're two individual bats. What individuates them is the matter. That's that second term on the list there. Matter is the principle of individuation. If you didn't have matter, you would just have the form batness or batitude or whatever the right word would be, but no individual bats. You only get individual bats when you have matter. Same thing with us human beings. If there were just the form humanity, there would just be one thing, and it would just be some ethereal something up in the formal heavens, as Plato might put it. But there's you and there's me, and the thing that's the same about us is our form. We're human beings. The thing that's different about us fundamentally is matter. You're located in space and time in a different place than I am due to the fact that we do not share the same matter or the same material. Essence is what a thing is, and that makes it sound a little bit like form, but really it's the essence of something is what it takes for a thing to be really real as the kind of thing that it is. Right? Now that's, if you listen to it, that's different from form. Form is the kind, but essence is what does it take for this kind of a thing to be real? So let me ask you a question here. Jump in if you can, or type in if you can. Feel free to step on each other, but and just throw stuff out there. What do you think is the essence of being a human being, a real live human being? What do you think is the essence of being a human being? The mind, I see Angela saying. Very good. So Angela, Soul, okay, the mind or the soul, we're on that end of things. So if you were just a mind or just a soul, would you be a human being? Is that enough? Yeah, Barbara, I think you're right. I think the answer is no. I don't think it's enough. So to be a real human being, yes, you have to have call it a soul, or call it the mind, or call it ideas. But what else would you need to have to be a real live human being? Reproduction and birth. And in order to have reproduction and birth, what else would we need? Yeah, the human body. Without the human body, no reproduction, no birth, maybe no brain, and then maybe no mind or consciousness. I don't know. So what Thomas would say, at least basically, at the most basic level, in order for a thing to be a human being, the essence of what it means to be a human being is to be a soul in an appropriate body. And the soul is an intellectual soul for a human being. So an intellectual soul in the appropriate body. If you don't have that, if you just had soul but no body, or you just had body and no soul, for Thomas, whatever you have there would not be a human being. And note, animals, I ought to take a vote on this. How many people say, yes or no, animals have souls? Vote yes or no. You guys thinking it over? Oh, I got some I don't knows. I got a no. I got some maybe a yes. Could be yes, might not be yes. Could be yes. All right, so I have some yeses. I have a no. I have some I don't knows. That's a tough one, right? Well, think about the word animal. Animal. The first part of that, you just take the L off the end of that, you have anima. And when Aristotle wrote a book on the human soul, it was called Psyche. And that's where we get our word psychology from, Psyche, psychology. But the Latin translation, and in fact, this is the way we know Aristotle's book, not by its Greek name, Psyche, but we know it as de anima, on the soul. So the very word animal has the word soul built right into it. And what Thomas would say is animals have souls, but they do not have intellectual souls, and so they don't have immortal souls. That's how he would answer the question. Other philosophers thought that they did not have souls whatsoever, that only humans had souls, because soul was defined by those philosophers or theologians as intellectual souls. Clearly, an earthworm or a carp does not have an intellectual soul, but Thomas would say they definitely have souls, they just don't have human souls. They have fish souls or worm souls or cat souls or whatever kind of animal that they are. Okay, so I see, Psyche, thank you, I'll spell it here. This is a transliteration of how to spell Psyche, P-S-Y-C-H-E. P-S-Y-C-H-E. In the Greek pronunciation, you say Psyche, that's the upsilon would be the word there, the letter there. But that's psyche, psychology, that's where we get our word from. And the Latin word is anima, A-N-I-M-A. Interesting, right? So those who are confused, I hope you're less confused by that. Now again, that's a matter of definition, I think we could say. What do you mean by soul? For Thomas, a soul is in effect the life force of the body. In fact, he believed that so much that he said, if your soul were to leave your body, the thing that's left over, the thing that we find collapsed on the floor, would not be, for Thomas, a human body at all. He would think about that for a second. If your soul were to leave your body, if your anima were to disappear from your body, the thing that would be left, crumpled onto the floor, would not be a human body at all for Thomas Aquinas, because he believes a human body is meant to be ensouled. That's what a human body is. What would be left is dust, feet, something of even a vessel, Barbara asks. Perhaps it's interesting to know whether Thomas's view is that your body is a vessel, like a compartment, and that your or vessel, made of clay, right? Is it something that contains your soul? And I think Thomas wouldn't quite exactly put it that way. Because that makes it sound like the clay is like a clay pot, that it's sort of nothing without the soul. But Thomas doesn't think it's nothing. He thinks it becomes substantially a different thing at the moment of our death, when the soul, whatever that is, when that disappears from the body, the thing that's left, it's not even the same kind of thing anymore. Whereas if you think of the body as a vessel or a container, just like I have a water glass in front of me, if I drain all the water out of the glass, it's now a dry glass. But it's still the same thing as it was. It was the glass, a vessel for holding water. But for Thomas, I think he meant that the body and soul were intimately interconnected at all times, and that death was a substantial transformation of both body and soul. In fact, you can find in the Summa Theologia, the question is the soul, are we our souls? Am I my soul? And what Thomas answers is no. You are not your soul. You are an ensouled body. That's what it means to be the human being that you are. Now, on his view, on his theological view, when you die, your intellectual soul is eternal and immortal. But that's not all of you. And just quickly, I don't know, how many of you, are interested in the Christian theological position of this. But just to remind you, if you're a Christian, you say in your creed, at the end of the creed, we wait for the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting, right? We wait for the resurrection of the body and life everlasting. If the body didn't matter, if your soul was you and you died and you, the whole you that you are, was eternal and was just driving around in this body, in this human life, you were just driving around like you were driving around in your car, and you got done with your car, you got done with your clothes, something like that. If you moved on, that should be the end of the story. You just get to go to heaven and be with God, and that's because that's you there. But the whole Christian story, isn't it, is about the body. Even the Christian story is about God having a body. So, I mean, I'm not, it's maybe above my pay grade to talk completely about Christian theology. I'm a philosopher, but I just, I point this out that it's very important that we understand who we are when we're thinking about our moral life together. And the body is important. It's very important for Aristotle because he said, the way he described it, your soul has vegetative and nutritive functions like heartbeats and cell regeneration. Well, that's the kind of talk that applies to a body. So Aristotle saw you as this integrated thing, and Thomas Aquinas sees you as this integrated thing. It's very important not to miss that, because if we start thinking of ourselves as this immaterial thing, then we start to downplay or denigrate our bodies. Not just our physical bodies, but also in many ways our body politic. I think these things can be related to each other. So, minimal essence of a human being for Thomas Aquinas is to have an intellectual soul in the appropriate body. And if those two things could ever be separated, whatever you have left is not human. It might be an immortal soul and clay or dust, but that's it. Okay. And then finally, very important for Thomas, extremely important, the difference between essence and existence, or the difference between form and existence, but it's really essence and existence. The essence of a human being is to be an intellectual soul in an appropriate body. We learn that. But existence is that thing actually is. It's the act of being. You can figure this out for yourself. You know what the essence of having $1 million in your bank account would be all about. You know what it would take to have a bank account with $1 million in it. But what you really want is not just to know the essence of that, but you want the existence of that $1 million in your bank, I think, if you value money a lot. So the difference between essence is kind of what that thing is all about, but existence, that's when that essence is plugged in, so to speak, as brought into reality, really exists. And that's going to be very important for Thomas's metaphysics. So let's pull some of this stuff together quickly by way of review. So Plato's metaphysics, we learned when we looked at the Euthyphro a little bit about the theory of forms. A thing is real if it participates a form. You're real because you participate a form. Humanity, my cat Bagheera is real because he participates the form catness or catitude. But if a thing were not any kind of a thing, it wouldn't be real at all. So to be real for Plato means that you participate in a form. The form for Plato was both the idea of a thing and the ideal of a thing, both what a thing is and how it is best for that thing to be. So in a way, Euthyphro, if you think about him a little bit and his decision to prosecute his father, he had an understanding of what a family is. Not just what a family is, but how it was best for that family to be. And he thought his didn't measure up, and he had to do things to bring it into alignment with the ideal of what a family is about. For Plato, the form is eternal and unchanging because it's perfect. So therefore it's perfect, Why is the eternal and unchanging perfect? Well, because if something is eternal and unchanging, the only change it could undergo is to get worse. So if something truly is eternal and unchanging, for Plato, he thought that meant that it was perfect. And things participate form in a very limited way as individuated in matter. So what's more important for Plato? The form humanity, which is eternal and unchanging, or is it you, me, and any other individual human being? What do you think? Anybody want to take a stab? What's more important for Plato, the form humanity, or this or that individual human person? Yeah, Barbara's exactly right. The form is the most important thing. That is eternal. That always was and always will be. But you and I, in our little matter, we're here for a while, then we're gone, not as important. And you could put that in a formula if you wanted and say it's the limitation of potency. The form, in a way, is a potency. It's what something could be. And there's a limitation of that ideal, that potency, by the actual human beings that you and I are. You and neither, we haven't met, but I'll speak for myself. I certainly am not the perfect human being. I have some glimpse of what it means to be a good or a better human being, and I'd like to be better, but I know that I am a human person in a limited way. I'm not the full perfection of what it means to be a human person. But now look at Aristotle's view. Aristotle, you remember, talked about the four causes. So let's go back to the baseball bat. Formal cause, what a thing is. Well, it's a baseball bat. Material cause, what a thing is made of. It's made of ash or some other kind of wood. Efficient cause, the Louisville Slugger baseball bat manufacturing company brings that bat into existence. And the final cause, the end or aim or goal or purpose of a thing, the why of a thing, it's to smack baseballs around. Any real thing is a substantial being as a function of its four causes. If there were a thing that lacked one of these four causes, it would not be real, according to Aristotle. So the key to Aristotle's metaphysics is substance. The key to Plato's was form, the limitation of the potency of the form by actual things. The foundation of Aristotle's metaphysics is substance based on these four causes. Now, Thomas thinks all real things have something in common. They exist. Take anything, a rock, a plant, a bird, a human being. Those things have nothing in common except one thing. They exist. They're real. So for Thomas, existence is the key to all metaphysics, that basic structure of reality. All real things are in act, and all real things are a particular kind of thing, an essence, a this, rather than a that. It's a rock, or it's a plant, or it's a cat, or it's a human. A thing's existence and its essence are distinct. I know what a cat is, but that doesn't make it necessary that this or that cat exists. My cat, God forbid, someday will die. I will miss him, and the essence of him will remain, but the existence will be gone at that point. All things that exist must get their existence, Thomas says, from a source that has it to an infinite degree. And he takes that from Aristotle's metaphysics. It must have, somewhere back along the line, a first efficient cause. I'm here because my parents were here. They're here because my grandparents. And they're here because my great-grandparents. Trace that all the way back to whatever, Adam and Eve, or trace it back to apes and single-celled animals, trace it back to the Garden of Eden, trace it back to the Big Bang. I don't care, but you got to trace it all the way back to something that's the source of everything that was necessary for me to come into existence. And Thomas says that's God. So the source of all that exists and all that is good is God. God's essence, though, what it means to be God, for Thomas, is the exact same thing as God's existence. They're one and the same thing. What God is and that God is identical. That's different from all the rest of us. So God is the infinite fount, the source of all existence, and everything participates in that existence due to God's goodness, what Thomas would say. So God, the fullness of existence, and all the convertible, positive, pure perfections. Okay, that's a mouthful. All that means is like goodness and beauty and truth. God is all that stuff without any limitation, purely. Right? So Thomas's metaphysics actually flips Plato's upside down here, and he thinks of it as limitation of act by potency. Act, pure existence, well, that's God, limited down into this or that set of potentialities. Think of it this way. What is a baseball bat? Well, it's a set of potentialities. You could use it as a to hit baseballs, or to stave off an attack, or to reach something on a high shelf, or as a paperweight, but you can't use it as an airplane. It doesn't have potential for that. You can't use it as a late-night snack. It doesn't have potential for that. It doesn't have those kind of potencies. A baseball bat is, you can think of it as just one set of potentialities. And a cat is a different set of potentialities. And this water glass next to me is another set of potentialities. Good for holding water, bad for hitting baseballs out of the park. All right? So each thing that's real is a limited existence as a set of potency. So what's interesting here is, if you go back, let me just go back real quick to Plato's Metaphysics, just real quick. So look at the bottom there, limitation of potency by act. What did we say was the most important thing? The form. Take that into the realm of morality and especially politics. What's more important, humanity or this or that person? What's more important, the nation or the citizen of the nation? What's more important? You see? The collective, the thing that gives identity to all the limited elements, is what's most important. But if you look at Thomas's metaphysics, in a sense, everything that exists as a vector, if I could put it that way, of pure existence. You know, a vector is a you might know from math class, is a quantity and a direction. Any vector is a quantity and a direction. So a water glass is a quantity and direction of existence. And a cat is another quantity and a different direction of what exists. And I and you are another quantity and direction of reality. But all of us carry around that reality, that existence in us, that we got from where? The ultimate source of that existence, God, according to Aquinas. So on Plato's view, the individual doesn't really count. A Platonic morality or a Platonic politics, the individual doesn't count as much. When John Kennedy says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you could do for your country, in a way, that's a Platonic injunction to all of us. But Thomas's metaphysics is interesting, at least in this sense, that it validates or gives great value to any real existing thing as being a carrier, so to speak, of its own divine source. Right? There's a certain dignity that comes to everything real for that reason. So click me whether that made any sense or whether you're confused. We're getting near the end here. Okay, it's good. All right, so we're just about done. So that's a little background of the the metaphysics to help you when you're reading Thomas. So a couple things here. First of all, how to read Thomas. I told you about the disputation, it was called, that the question was posed for the students, and then they would each give their answer and have a debate, and then the master would step in. Well, if you read sections from the Summa Theologia, and in fact you can get a good example of this on pages in your book 30 to 32, about what I'm going to talk about here in a second. But in the Summa Contra Gentiles, the Summa Theologia, there's 5 parts to everything Thomas is right. First, there's a question. Second are the objections. It usually begins with, it seems that, and these what they call objections are positions that are wrong. Right? So I can always tell if students write me something on Thomas Aquinas and they go and they read Thomas, but they don't read all of it. So, for instance, they'll get a question: is the human being the soul? Is the soul the human being? That's one of the questions. Is the soul the human being? And the first thing it would say, it seems that the soul is the human being. So they see that written down, and they write it down. They say, well, that's what Thomas said. Well, that's because they didn't know the structure of how to read Thomas. Thomas is like a polite guy, right? He asks a question, then he allows the other people, the people who disagree with him, to go first. So there's a question, and the next thing is the wrong answers. Then there's a little third part called the sed contra, which is in English, on the other hand, in which an authority, it could be a quote from the Bible, it could be a quote from Aristotle, who will be referred to as just simply as the philosopher. When you read Thomas and he talks about the philosopher, he only means Aristotle. One of these authorities is quoted to indicate the proper answer. The fourth part is a very significant part. That's the responsio. It begins in English with I answered that. That's what Latin responsio means, giving the main body of the correct answer to the question. And then the last portion, the fifth portion, Thomas will go back and point by point show why the objections in the second section happen to be wrong. So the point is, if you want to know what Thomas is saying, don't quote from the second piece. That's a common novice mistake. So here's an example. This is what you can find on page 30 of your book. The question is, from the first part of the Summa Theologia, question 2, article 3, has the 5 elements, and this part of your book, which does a lot of editing, has these parts. So the question is whether God exists. Then the next thing you read is, it seems that God does not exist. Now, when a student writes that, Thomas Aquinas, Saint Thomas Aquinas, the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, said, it seems that God does not exist, and then they don't say anything more. You got to think that's wrong. Just haven't written it on the page, but sometimes it happens. People today, even today, have these same objections and think that means God does not exist. First of all, there's evil. And if there's a good God, why would there be evil? And second of all, as the scientist Laplace says, I don't have any need of that hypothesis. Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and now Stephen Hawking all say the same thing. There's no need of the hypothesis of God to understand the world. Okay, well, those are 2 common objections. Thomas's point of view, though, he quotes the Bible. He quotes Exodus. I am who am. God has announced that God exists. The fourth part, Thomas says, so I answer that. And then he talks about the famous 5 ways that you can prove or demonstrate God's existence. Because there's motion, there must be a God. Because there's causality, there must be a God. Because there's contingent things that didn't need to be, that requires that there be at least one thing that was a necessary thing, and that must be God. The argument from degrees of being, if something is good, there must be a best, and only God is best, that kind of an argument. And the last one is the argument from design or final causality. Look at how everything fits together. There must be a designer. Those are Thomas's famous 5 ways. And then the fifth part, he gives the objections. Okay, so just to finish up for tonight then, about our readings, we're going to read from the parts I want to focus on from the text is pages 42 to 80. These readings come from the Summa Theologia, the second part, the big second part, from the first part of the second part and the second part of the second part. A key part of this is known now as the Treatise on Law. It comes from the first part of the second part of the Summa, questions 90 to 97. Pay very close attention to this section. And I put this PowerPoint up so you can just click the link from Blackboard on this PowerPoint slide right here. It's the second to last one in the presentation. You can read questions 90 to 97 in their entirety if you wish. I recommend that. And then the readings from the second part of the second part concern particular moral issues, whether you should have anything to do with unbelievers and heretics, whether war is ever justified, what about sedition, what about murder and theft and fraud and self-defense and usury and lying and virginity and drunkenness and all kinds of cool stuff like that we have to think about, the moral ramifications of. And then the last thing that I want you to focus on from the book is pages 189 to 225 that deal with some contemporary philosophers, or relatively contemporary philosophers, mainly from the last century, and their ideas on natural law based on Thomas's moral and political thought. And the readings will tell you exactly what natural law is all about. So there's John Finnis and Mortimer Adler and Jacques Maritain and Kai Nielsen, who happens to be an atheist, and Vernon Bork, and Reinhold Niebuhr, who's a Protestant. So you got a kind of a mix of responses and reflections on this idea of natural law, that we can understand moral, or we can, let me rephrase that we can know how to make moral choices based on understanding our human nature. Human nature tells us in broad outlines how we should act. That's actually a controversial claim, and these contemporary figures will talk about that a little bit. So that's all the presentation that I have for tonight. I thank you for your patience. Does anybody want to add anything or ask any questions? I know I monopolized the time, but feel free to. Oh, thank you, Barbara. That's very kind. Barbara's clapping. It says that's terrific. I think maybe she's just clapping that it's over. Yeah, right? Is that right, Barbara? Clapping that it's over. Anybody else? Well, if this worked, then this should be archived, and you should be able to listen to it. I'd appreciate getting an email from you, if you don't mind, at some point, just letting me know whether you found this at all helpful. I feel like I did most of the talking, but if these synchronous meetings are helpful, maybe we could have another one. Otherwise, there will be some more recorded presentations that I'll put up in Blackboard that you'll be able to listen to and review the PowerPoints that way. And again, I'm here. You guys are doing a great job of teaching each other in the forums and on the wiki. So I congratulate you. It's really fun reading your responses. Not just fun, but it's edifying too. I'm learning things. So thank you very much for that. Anything else? Okay, well, have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.
You too. Thank you.